Hello and welcome back to Holy Discourse. My ear itches. Hang on. You hear a lot of crazy movement. Okay. So we're gonna look at JD Vance's first interview as vice president. I've heard a lot of people be like on the internet being like, "Oh, he's gonna be our next president" or whatever. Apparently, this interview, like, people were like, "Hey, this is good." So I have no clue. I haven't watched any of it, so we're about to experience it together. Let's try this again.
Smallest margin since the job was created, you would break that tie. If the nominee can't unite your party, how's he going to lead 3 million people?
Well, look, I think Pete is a disruptor, and a lot of people don't like that disruption, but Margaret, that disruption is incredibly necessary. If you think about all of those bipartisan massive votes, we have to ask ourselves, what did they get us? They got us a country where we fought many wars over the last 40 years, but haven't won a war about as long as I've been alive. They've got us a military with a major recruitment crisis, a procurement price crisis that's totally dysfunctional, where we buy airplanes for billions and billions of dollars, terrible cost overruns, the delivery dates are always delayed. So we need a big change. Now, admittedly, there are people who don't like that big change, but it is necessary, and it's explicitly what Donald J. Trump ran on, and I think part of the reason why the American people elected him their 47th president.
So the main objective is changing all of that? That it's going to be Pete Hegseth alone?
I'd say the main problem the main thing that we want Pete Hegseth to do is to fix the problems at the Department of Defense. And unfortunately, there are many. We've gotten into way too many wars that we don't have a plan for winning. We've gotten into way too many misadventures that we shouldn't have got into in the very first place. And
I would agree with that. I think that's a problem of America for many, 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 many years, is we put our hands in everything. And honestly, like, I don't understand why. Like, are we supposed to be like the big, like, parents of like coming in, and we're supposed to be like the heroes and come and rescue? Because other people in other countries hate America just because we just come in and we're just destroying everything. We're being in wars that we shouldn't be in, that we have no business in being in. I would agree.
Procurement process, Margaret, is incredibly broken. We're in an era.
Decisions.
Well, of course, they're policy decisions, but they're also logistical and implementation decisions. If you look at where we are with the rise of artificial intelligence, with the rise of drone technology and drone warfare, we have to really, top to bottom, change the way that we fund the procurement of weapons, the way that we arm our troops. This is a major period of disruption, and we think Pete Hegseth is the guy to lead the job. Now, there's another element to this, Margaret, too, which is we believe that military morale, at least until the election of President Trump, was historically low. You had the Army missing recruitment goals by tens of thousands of soldiers, and already recruitment is starting to pick up because Pete Hegseth is fundamentally a war.
Is it? I have no clue. So, the last time I heard that, it sounds like even like if you have like a big tattoo and stuff like that, they'll deny you because I have so many people going in. I don't know if that's still the case, but I don't know how many years ago that was now, but I remember I was talking to my uncle, and he likes history and following news and stuff like that, and he was like, yeah, like the military is like, a lot of them are like, yeah, if you get like a certain size tattoo that covers you or whatever, a lot of times they just won't let you in, just because of that. So I don't know. I just haven't seen that as a problem, because I'm like, okay, they're denying people that are perfectly fine, and they have a tattoo. So I don't know. I don't see that as an issue, but it very much could be, and I could just be blind to it.
Fighters leader at the Department of Defense. He is a guy who sees not through the perspective of the generals or the bureaucrats. He looks at things through the perspective of the men and women that we send off to fight in our wars.
Both the Wall Street Journal and the National Review, conservative publications, as you know, have been critical of Tulsi Gabbard. The Review called her an atrocious nominee who deserves to be defeated. They compared her defense of Edward Snowden, the fugitive who stole U.S. secrets, to an attorney general who thinks the mob gets a bad rap. Her refusal to accept U.S. intelligence findings that Assad gassed his own people, they said, was like a nominee for OMB director not being able to count.
No, I mean, I'm very in the middle about what I think about Snowden. I think informing people that, hey, like, the government's watching you, I don't think is a bad thing. But at the same time, I think the way he did it, and there was like sensitive material that he didn't even read over, and he was just giving to random like news people, like civilians. I'm like, dude, you can't just be doing that. So yeah, this is just what I've experienced from the John Oliver interview. He did like a whole thing on like surveillance and Edward Snowden. And I think John Oliver was right when he kind of like called him out and was like, dude, you just said like you just like skimmed over some of them. You can't be giving like, you don't know if you're giving government like secrets of like where troops are and stuff like that. Like, people can get killed because of what you just sent out and you just didn't bother to read. At the same time, I think Edward Snowden did also a lot of good on, like, people should know. People should know that they're being watched through cameras and all sorts of stuff, and I don't think that's a bad thing for people to know and for people to make judgment on, of like, the US government shouldn't be getting in my business. Like, they should just leave me alone.
Campaign on lowering prices for consumers. We've seen all of these executive orders. Which one lowers prices?
We have done a lot, and there have been a number of executive orders that have caused already jobs to start coming back into our country, which is a core part of lowering prices. More capital investment, more job creation in our economy is one of the things that's going to drive down prices for all consumers, but also raise wages so that people can afford to buy the things that they need. If you look at our slate of executive orders, no, Margaret, prices are going to come down, but it's going to take a little bit of time, right? The president has been president for all of 5 days. I think that
I was going to say, it's not a switch. I think kind of what he's talking about is, I mean, I've always kind of had the same opinion. I'm like, if you just raise wages, but you don't, you're not looking at the business aspect of it, of like, businesses are just going to raise their prices. Like, if you just raise the wages, so you can't just raise wages and expect like, oh, everything's going to be better now, I'm going to be able to afford my groceries and stuff like that. Because like, no, because they're going to raise prices on groceries and, you know, fast food and like, just anything and everything if we're raising everyone's like wage, because there's no, businesses are going to be like, I still want to make like a crap ton of money, or I want to make this or that. And so you have to kind of, I think bringing jobs in could help start lowering that some. I don't know. I think I would look a little bit more towards corporate stuff and see if you could like cut deals with businesses and be like, hey, can you like maybe like lower your prices a little bit, and like not do the whole thing of like, oh, if I lower my prices, I'm gonna make like box sizes smaller. Like, I don't know. Think about like cereal or something like that. Like, oh yeah, we'll cut our prices down, but then the cereal box gets smaller or whatever gets smaller. So I think there's got to be negotiations with businesses as well. I think bringing more jobs in is great. Like, it's one of those things of then more people are paying taxes, that's getting back into the government. It's, you know, it's a full circle of everyone's kind of prospering at that point.
Those 5 days, he's accomplished more than Joe Biden did in 4 years. It's been an incredible breakneck pace of activity. We're going to work with Congress.
Wow,
we're, of course, going to have more executive
right
orders.
Under the
and we're
bus
going
for
to try,
Biden.
the way that you lower prices is that you encourage more capital investment into our country. And you ask specifically, what executive order is going to help lower prices? All of the stuff that we've done on energy, to explore more energy reserves, to develop more energy resources in the United States of America. One of the main drivers of increased prices under the Biden administration is that we had a massive increase in energy prices. Donald Trump has already taken multiple executive actions that are going to lower energy prices. And I do believe that means consumers are going to see lower prices at the pump and at the grocery store, but it's going to take a little bit of time. Rome wasn't built in a day.
Yeah.
And while we've done a whole lot, we can't undo all of the damage of Joe Biden's presidency
Well, there are a
in
lot of
4
things
days.
that contributed to high.
Yeah, I'm wondering if, like, so I was watching a Peter Santinello, I guess you would call them documentaries, but he was visiting Hawaii, and they were talking about, like, the people living there were talking about, like, oh yeah, they like import avocados because somehow importing them was cheaper, even though they can grow them in Hawaii, which made no sense. But I wonder if for like oil and stuff like that, because I know Trump's talked about digging in America. If you're digging in America, is that going to make it cheaper than shipping it over? I would assume so, but I don't know. Because if it is, then yeah, you're going to see lower gas prices, and that could lower other products of, like, again, the cereal box kind of analogy. Like, it's got to get there somehow. Like, it's got to get to the store somehow. It's going to go by semi. If gas prices are cheaper, then they could probably, put the cereal box for a little bit cheaper as well. And whatever else that truck is carrying.
Higher energy prices, and there was record oil and gas production.
Yes, Joe Biden did
But the price
many
of eggs,
terrible
the
things
that
to
people
lead to an
see-
increase in prices. I agree, Margaret.
No, but all the things you experience at the grocery store are what people touch and feel. That's what you were talking about, bacon on the campaign trail.
Of course, of course.
Those things, when do consumers actually get to touch and feel a difference in their lives?
Well, but Margaret, how does bacon get to the grocery store? It comes on trucks that are fueled by diesel fuel. If the diesel is way too expensive, the bacon's going to become more expensive. How do we grow the bacon?
I shouldn't even talk. JD's got it. Gosh darn it. Okay. You go. I'm out of here. I'm done with the video. He can just talk the rest of the time. He's making the same points.
Farmers need energy to produce it. So if we lower energy prices, we are going to see lower prices for consumers, and that is what we're trying to fight for.
Well, the flurry of executive orders, most of them weren't about the economy. Many of them
were, though, Margaret. We had, I think
You
we've,
had
we've
a
taken
promise
over
of tariffs by February
We've
1st.
taken over 200 executive actions, some executive orders, other executive actions. Again, this is in less than a week, and a lot of them were focused on the economy, bringing investment into our country and lowering energy prices. We've also focused on safety, restoring public safety, ending weaponization of the Department of Justice. We've done a lot. And I think the president is to be commended for actually coming in and doing something with this incredible mandate the American people gave him. He's not sitting in the Oval Office doing nothing. He's doing the American people's business, and I think they're going to see a lot of good effects from it.
Well, a lot of these announcements have yet to take effect.
Sure.
The president did say he wants to do something with an executive order in relation to federal emergency response. He said he may reform or eliminate FEMA. Instead of sending emergency responders, he may start to send a percentage of money to states to take care of themselves. But FEMA has specialized expertise that some of these states just don't have in
Margaret,
their arsenal. And
I wish
how
that they-
will states who are lower income states, the Mississippis, the Kentuckys, the Alabamas, be able to do this for themselves without federal help?
Well, the president, to be clear, is not saying we're going to leave anybody behind. He's saying that in the way that we administer these resources, some of which is coming from the federal level, some of which is coming from the state level, we've got to get the bureaucrats out of the way and get the aid to the people who need it most.
But these
Let's
are the
be
first
honest,
responders.
Margaret, you talk about the expertise from FEMA. FEMA in North Carolina, in California, in Florida with some of the hurricanes has often been a disaster. And it's not because we don't have good people at FEMA, it's because bureaucratic red tape and garbage prevents the rapid deployment of resources
But
to
the
the people who need
states
it
are
most.
now going to have to do this themselves?
The president is trying to encourage us to reform the way that we deliver emergency response in a way that gets resources
So
to the
don't
people
take
who
him
need
literally,
it.
is what you're saying.
We should take the president at his word that FEMA needs desperate reform, because it does. Margaret, when I went to North Carolina as VP-elect, but before we were sworn in, people would talk about how FEMA would get resources, food, medicine, water to a warehouse, but then would have no plan to get it from the warehouse to the people in the mountains who were literally starving and thirsting to death. We can do so much better, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we will.
But they work with the state and local officials.
They often
So
don't work
now
well
it's
enough. And again, that's
going
not
to be on
because
the state
of
and local officials?
the FEMA management officials don't work well enough with the state and local officials to get resources to the people who need it.
Honestly, I don't know if this is a good idea or not, but I'm very, small government, so I'm all for, a lot of times of, the main government kind of leaving states alone and letting states like helping the states, but like also letting the states kind of do their own thing because they understand their market. They understand like Florida and stuff like that. They're used to like hurricanes coming in, where like as California is used to fires coming in, so they kind of understand how to they understand what they need to do versus like the big government coming in and people from DC, you know, going down to Florida or going down to California with fires happening or hurricanes happening. They don't know what they don't live there. They are not boots on the ground. They don't understand what is going on and what people need. So
we should expect, and this is, I think, one of the fundamental premises of President Trump's leadership, the American people should expect more of their government. When there's a terrible disaster, they should expect food, medicine, and water to get to the people who need it. When there's a terrible fire in California, the fire hydrants ought to actually turn on. I am sick of the American people having such low expectations for their government. They should demand more of us because it's the greatest country in the world, and that's what Donald Trump's leadership promises to bring back.
So still count on the federal government.
I mean, yeah, people like I don't trust the U.S. government as far as I can throw them. Like, no. So I don't think it's a bad thing that they're trying to gain trust back and do that. I think JD, as far as what I've heard here, he seems like a lot better talker and a little bit more sensible of just looking at the problem and being like, hey, this is good or this is bad and this is why. Trump's a cartoon as a human being. He is a wild child. He just is. There's no ifs, ands, ors, or buts about it. He's a little crazy. I don't think all of his policies are a bad idea. But at the same time, I think some of his policies he doesn't. I think with some things you have to toe the line because you might not agree with it, but at the same time, you're getting into other people's lives, so that are not doing anything to hurt others or doing anything to do anything to others. So you have to kind of be like, okay, this is an opinion I have. This is how I feel like people should live their lives, but at the same time, it's also, it's America, it's a free country, so it's a balance.
But watch that space. Let me ask you about another area that you campaigned on quite a lot, and there was a flurry of activity on, and that has to do with immigration.
Sure.
The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops this week condemned some of the executive orders signed by President Trump, specifically those allowing immigration and customs enforcement to enter churches and to enter schools. Do you personally support the idea of conducting a raid or enforcement action in a church service, at a school?
Well, let me address this. Of course, if you have a person who is convicted of a violent crime, whether they're an illegal immigrant or a non-illegal immigrant, you have to go and get that person to protect the public safety. That's not unique to immigration. But let me just address this particular issue, Margaret, because as a practicing Catholic, I was actually heartbroken by that statement. And I think that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops needs to actually look in the mirror a little bit and recognize that when they receive over $100 million to help resettle illegal immigrants, are they worried about humanitarian concerns, or are they actually worried about their bottom line? We are going to enforce immigration law. We're going to protect the American people.
Yeah.
Donald Trump promised to do that, and I believe the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, if they're worried about the humanitarian costs of immigration enforcement, let them talk about the children who have been sex trafficked because of the wide open border of Joe Biden.
You personally
let them talk
support them
about
going into
people like
schools
Laken
and
Riley
churches.
who were brutally murdered. I support us doing law enforcement against violent criminals, whether they're illegal immigrants or anybody else, in a way that keeps us safe. Let me ask this question,
But
Margaret. Let's separate the immigration issue. If you had a violent murderer in a school, of course I want law enforcement to go and get that person out.
Of course.
So what's the point of the question?
You changed the regulation this week. That's the point of the question.
Exactly.
Giving
So,
the authority
yes,
to go into churches
exactly.
and go into schools.
We empowered law enforcement to enforce
But
the
that
law
also
everywhere
has
to
a
protect
knock-on
Americans.
effect, a chilling effect, arguably, to people to not send their kids to school.
I desperately hope it has a chilling
in the
effect on
churches,
illegal
you think
immigrants
the
coming
U.S.
into our
Conference
country.
of Catholic Bishops are actively hiding criminals from
I think the U.S.
law
Conference
enforcement?
of Catholic Bishops has frankly.
Although I understand people coming into the country of like trying to seek asylum and trying to seek stuff like that, It's like if you're coming in illegal, you've already broken a law, technically. So technically, they can just grab you and throw you back because you crossed over illegally. So, I mean, I don't think it's always right if they're not hurting anyone or anything like that. I'm good with giving people a chance, but at the same time, the U.S. government's going to see it as you have broken a law, you have come over, you're not trying to seek asylum, you're not trying to do this or that, you're just trying to live in America illegally. We're going to throw you back. And they're going to see it as black and white. Which, government-wise, I mean, I understand. I don't necessarily always agree with it, but I understand why they're doing what they're doing.
Not been a good partner in common sense immigration enforcement that the American people voted for. And I hope, again, as a devout Catholic, that they'll do better.
I want to ask you about refugee admissions, which were just suspended by the president. That has nothing to do with the U.S. border. Refugee screening takes 18 to 24 months to go through. They are heavily vetted. Left literally at the airport this week were thousands of Afghans, some of whom had worked with the United States government and were promised to come here. When you talked to us in August, you said, I don't think we should abandon anybody who's been properly vetted and helped us. Do you stand by that?
Well, Margaret, I don't agree that all these immigrants or all these refugees have been properly vetted. In fact, we know that there are cases of people who allegedly were properly vetted and then were literally planning terrorist attacks on our country. That happened during the campaign, if you may remember. So clearly not all of these foreign nationals
but there are
have been properly
30,000
vetted.
people in the pipeline, Afghan refugees.
But my primary
Do you stand
concern
by it?
as the vice president, Margaret, is to look after the American people. And now that
So
we
no.
know that we have vetting problems with a lot of these refugee programs, we absolutely cannot unleash thousands of unvetted people into our country.
These people
it's
are
not
vetted.
good.
These people are vetted.
Just like the guy who planned a terrorist attack in Oklahoma a few months ago, he was allegedly properly vetted, and many people in the media and the Democratic Party said that he was properly vetted. Clearly he wasn't. I don't want my children to share a neighborhood with people who are not properly vetted, and because I don't want it for my kids, I'm not going to force any other American citizens' kids to do that either.
No, and that was a very particular case. It wasn't clear if he was radicalized when he got here or while he was living here.
I don't really care, Margaret. I don't want that person in my country, and I think most Americans agree with me.
2 weeks ago, you were on Fox News, and you said, if you protested peacefully on January 6th and had Merrick Garland's Department of Justice treat you like a gang member, you should be pardoned. If you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned. Did you counsel the president against these blanket pardons for 1,500 people,
Well, Margaret, I noticed
including those who committed violence?
Margaret, I noticed that you cut off the thing that I said immediately after that. The full quote is that, of course, there are gray areas. And here's the nature of the gray area. Merrick Garland's Department of Justice denied constitutional protections in the prosecutions. There were double standards in how sentences were applied to the J6 protesters versus other groups. What the president said consistently on the campaign is that he was going to look at a case-by-case basis, and that's exactly what we did. We looked at 1,600 cases, and the thing that came out of it, Margaret, is that there was a massive denial of due process of liberty, and a lot of people were denied their constitutional rights. The president believes that, I believe that, and I think he made the right decision.
Daniel Rodriguez.
Obviously, I don't know. I don't know the whole scope. It's not like I was like, oh, I was there, and whatever. But if people were protesting peacefully, then yeah, they should be pardoned. There should be. People have freedom of speech. They're allowed to say what they want to say. But yeah, no, if you're like breaking down windows and doing all that, yeah, no, no. Straight to jail. No.
Rodriguez used an electroshock weapon against a policeman who was dragged out of the defensive line by plunging it into the officer's neck. He was imprisoned, sentenced to 12 years, 7 months. He got a pardon. Ronald Maccabee hit a cop while wearing reinforced brass knuckle gloves, and he held one down on the ground as other rioters assailed the officer for over 20 seconds, causing a concussion. If you stand with law enforcement, how can you call these people unjustly imprisoned?
Margaret, you're separating, there's an important issue here. There's what the people actually did on January the 6th, and we're not saying that everybody did everything perfectly. And then what did Merrick Garland's Department of Justice do in unjustly prosecuting well over 1,000 Americans in a way that was politically motivated?
Is violence like that against a police officer ever justified?
Violence against a police officer is not justified, but that doesn't mean that you should have Merrick Garland's weaponized Department of Justice expose you to incredibly unfair process, to denial of constitutional rights, and frankly, to a double standard that was not applied to many people, including, of course, the Black Lives Matter rioters who killed over 24 people and never had the weight of a weaponized Department of Justice come against them. The pardon power is not just for people who are angels or people who are perfect. And of course, we love our law enforcement and want people to be peaceful with everybody, but especially with our good cops. That's a separate issue from what Merrick Garland's Department of Justice did. We rectified a wrong, and I stand by it.
I'm being told we're out of time, but I want to quickly
Sure.
ask you, the
Please.
richest men in the world were at that Capitol on Inauguration Day. Heads of Amazon, Google, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook. In August, you told us Google and Facebook are too big. We ought to take the Teddy Roosevelt approach. Break them up. Don't let them control what people are allowed to say. They've now donated to the Trump inauguration. Are you still going to break up big tech?
So, you know who else was at the inauguration? Was my mom and a lot of people who just supported the president and fought every single day to get his election. And
They
to make
gave
it, and
$1
to make
million
it, and to make it
each
possible.
to
I mean, I don't disagree with breaking stuff like that up. Amazon, I think, is like a different beast. Amazon is like, that would be like breaking up a flea market. You know what I mean? Like it's so many different businesses all in one. So I don't know with Amazon if breaking it up would be the right thing. But there's a lot of other companies that I think we could benefit from if we broke stuff up.
the inauguration.
Well, there were a lot of people who didn't give $1 million to the inauguration.
pretty good seating.
Who were on that stage, Margaret. They didn't have as good a seating as my mom and a lot of other people who were there to.
Oh, good Lord. No one cares. Why are you talking about your mom? She's common folk. She got to sit in the front. Yes, because you're vice president. Of course she's going to sit, like, in a really good seat. She's talking about million and billionaires, like, all sitting there. And if we're talking about breaking up stuff, then why are you... She's saying this could be seen as a double standard. And I understand that. I kind of agree with that.
Support us. But look, we believe fundamentally that big tech does have too much power, and there are two ways they can go about this. They can either respect Americans' constitutional rights, they can stop engaging in censorship, and if they don't, you can be absolutely sure that Donald Trump's leadership is not going to look too kindly on them.
So they're still on notice.
They're very much on notice.